So a very, very warm welcome to all of you to this webinar and to the presentation of the recently published book, Conflict Mediation in the Arab World. We are really happy that so many have decided to join us and to see this interest in conflict resolution and mediation in the Arab world. In this meeting, we will have a chance to learn about the book, to have a conversation with the editors on mediation and conflict resolution. We will have start with a presentation by the two editors, Professors Ibrahim Freyhat and Isak Svensson, and we will then have two practitioners, Karma Ekmekji and Barbro Svedberg, who will be commenting. This part of the first part with the presentations will be recorded, but then as some of you may already have heard, we will stop before the Q&A so that we can have a free-flowing conversation. My name is Charlotte Aspare. I am the director of the Swedish Dialogue Institute for the Middle East and North Africa. The Institute is a Swedish governmental body under the Swedish Foreign Ministry, and our mandate is to contribute to being a platform to dialogue in the Middle East and North Africa region and between the region on topics related to political, economic, and social development, and not least to issues related to peace and security. So without further ado, I would like to introduce the professors Freyhat and Svensson, the two editors of the book. Dr. Ibrahim Freyhat is Associate Professor in International Conflict Resolution at Doha Institute for Graduate Studies and Non-Resident Fellow at Deakin University's Middle East Forum in Australia. He previously served as Senior Foreign Policy Fellow at Brookings Institution and taught conflict resolution at Georgetown University and George Washington University. Dr. Isak Svensson is a professor at the Department of Peace and Conflict Research at Uppsala University in Sweden and the holder of the Dag Hammarskjöld Chair in Peace and Conflict Research. His research focuses on international mediation in civil wars, religious dimension of armed conflicts, and nonviolent civil resistance. Both have published extensively, and now most recently this book that we are here to discuss today. So Dr. Freyhat, I'm turning to you first to tell us, why did you decide to make this book and what is it about?
Thank you very much for the question and for the invitation for organizing this book launch. We are very delighted to be with you and talk more about the book. The whole idea of the book actually started in 2018 when Isaac and I, we were in a track to workshops in Austria, where we met there. It started during the coffee break during the workshop. So during a coffee break, we started talking, and then we were frustrated by the lack of success in international mediation in conflicts in the region. So during this coffee break conversation, the idea came up. Why don't we put together your thoughts and mine and your efforts and mine and to start to come up with something? 5 years later, we have this book between our hands. So that's the story of the book. Now, when we started designing the book and what we wanted to do, we focused on three main things of the idea of the book. One is that bring together regional scholars together, as we usually see books written by Western scholars about the region, or we see regional scholars writing about themselves. So we wanted to bridge this gap, and we invited conflict resolution and mediation scholars from the region and from international. So to come up with this complementary discussion about the view from within and the view from outside. So, and we were successful in that, of inviting 17 international regional scholars to contribute. The second thing we looked at is to try to integrate both theory and practice. So we have theoreticians, scholars who wrote extensively international mediations, but we also have scholars who contributed who played a role actually in some of these mediation initiatives. For example, in the UN mission in Libya, in the UN mission in Yemen, and also in Palestine. So we had a chance to look at the view from within. And the third thing, we used theory in order to help us, international mediation theory, to help us understand these conflicts. But also we use the findings of these mediations to inform theory. So it's mutual on both sides in order to come up with this. Why we were frustrated about this? Basically, about the lack of success, because looking at the statistics, actually, there have been from 1975 to 2008, 31 armed conflicts in the region. Of these 31 armed conflicts, there were only 5 peace agreements, which is about 6% successful. 16% successful peace agreements as a result of mediation. So, which is 16% is a very, very low percentage. And not only this, but also in these 5 cases, conflicts and violence was renewed after a while. So it was not even lasting on that level. So that's why we decided to dig into this further and to try to see what are the causes of the failure, why international peace mediation is not working in the region, and why and how this can be improved better. So this is the whole idea. Now we can talk about this more in details in the discussion, but we found 3 major reasons why international mediation does not work or did not work in the past. One is that the complexity of these conflicts. These conflicts are very complex. They're existential between the parties in some areas. Why it's about, for example, in Syria, it's the Assad or we burn the country, or the statement known. And also these conflicts are fragmented. They're internationalized. There are many internationals who are playing a role in this, and they have vested interest. The second factor, the second reason for is the problem of the process design. These processes, mediation processes, we found they're not non-inclusive. They're externally driven. So it's UN, US, Russia is all externally driven without a real ownership of the mediation process or capitalizing on the knowledge and the ownership of the locals or of the internal players. And the third findings is about the delivery, the conduct of mediation, where these peace processes in many areas tend to be process without peace. So a peace process became a process without peace. But not only this, but also there is a monopoly of this mediation where, for example, the US has been mediating in the case of Palestine, Israel since 1993. There is a monopoly. Also, there is a UN monopoly in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen. So this monopoly is another major problem. And also there is a manipulation and biased mediator where played a destructive or non-helpful role in some of these conflicts, where mediation actually became an industry, a business, just keep replacing mediators in Yemen, 5, 6 mediators, in Libya, 5, 7. So it became a whole process and business industry of changing mediators and bringing mediation and more of that. And we lost focus in the process, and we got caught up in this business. And in the case of, and I'll end here with the manipulation, for example, where the US, as an example, intervening in the case of Palestine, instead of addressing the power imbalance, as George Mitchell did in Northern Ireland, where George Mitchell addressed the power imbalance in Northern Ireland and came up with the Good Friday Agreement, the U.S. intervention in the case of Palestine-Israel, it leveraged the powerful party and pressured the weaker party. So it further damaged or further deepened the power imbalance, which led to a total failure, and the powerful party taking advantage of the process and building more settlements, and the whole process failed for almost 3 decades. So I'll end here, and we can definitely elaborate and discuss more on any of these points. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim, for this excellent start. So over to you, Professor Svensson, to enlighten us further.
Thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, Charlotta, and to the Swedish Dialogue Institute for this great initiative. And also thank you to Ibrahim for great collaboration over these years. It's been a pleasure and a joy. And this has really been a teamwork where we have brought together, sort of tried to bridge divides that exist in the field of study of mediation in the Arab world, where we have had mediation scholars on the one hand that have studied this maybe too abstract, and we have had specialists, both from practitioners and specialists, that maybe not fully have engaged with the insights that exist in the negotiation and mediation research and theory. So as Ibrahim said, that this was one of the frustrations that led us to sort of launch this project and try to have this book as an attempt, as a basis for overcoming this bridge. And the basic puzzle, what we want to understand in this book, is the puzzle around mediation failure. How come when we see so much mediation occurring, that so little of the international mediation is successful? And it is a puzzle that is a scholarly puzzle. If mediation is effective, if we invest in mediation, we must do that because we think that it has a positive effect. It's also a puzzle from a policy perspective. Why is not the tools of mediation more effective than it is? So in order to explore this, we studied 3 basic questions in this research, and I framed this slightly differently than Ibrahim. It's 3 basic questions that also exist in mediation literature, and that's the question of onset. Why do we see mediation occurring in some circumstances and not others? And this opens up a whole field of discussions around the supply and demand of mediation. When do parties want to engage in mediation? When are third parties willing to step in? And when do we see a match between those that are most capable of mediating to go in to mediate? It's a question of ripeness. Many of you might recognize this concept. It was coined by Professor Sartman, a leading mediation scholar, who's also one of the authors, contributors in this book. Ripeness is about the timing of mediation. When are the parties actually ready to seriously engage in a constructive attempt to solve the conflict? It's a question about motives, and we should understand that mediators may have altruistic motives for why they engage, but they may also have other motives, and it's important to recognize these types of motives. And Ibrahim talked about biased mediators that can be there and that can have particular ties to the parties, for instance. And the question of mandate, which is a central question that we discuss in the book, and we see more and more research paying attention to this. What are the best mandates that the mediators can be given to do their actions? Should it be a narrow or broad mandate, but it should be specific, detailed? Is the discrepancy between the resources and the support that the mediator get and the mandate that they have provided? And some of the chapters analyzing the mediation efforts in Syria illustrate this kind of dilemma when the mandate and the support do not align. The second question is around strategies and tactics, how mediators should involve to try to be effective. Here, there's a discussion around the use of leverage, sort of powerful mediation, actually put pressure, working through, on the other hand, trust-building processes. And then the third question is about outcomes. And of course, this is the ultimate question for mediation research. Mediation research wants to understand, why do mediation work in some circumstances and not others? So as an academic, let me start. I'm not starting, I'm rounding up here, but let me in my start with the definition of mediation that we use here. We define the concept of mediation as broad as an intervention by an actor or actors not directly party to the conflict, yet attempting to help the parties in conflict settle, manage, or resolve their conflicts. Mediation can be linked to, but falls beyond, force-based approaches, such as military interventions and peacekeeping, and institutional legal mechanisms, such as arbitration or domestic democratic or legal systems. That's the basic for the definition. And what we explore here is mediation at 3 different levels: between countries, within countries, and the intrastate conflict between the government and non-state armed groups, and then local level mediation. And we find, to end my remarks here, our basic finding is that mediation is important, but in order to explain the failures, we cannot only look at mediation, we need to look at other factors as well. Mediation is interact with other types of factors. And these factors has to do both with sort of structural factors, trying to influence the parties to make them willing to seek a solution, and also process design factors. And Ibrahim pointed out some of these points. An important point is also that those few successes that we find are on the local level. So the external international level, the external
Can I please ask the persons who are not speaking to mute themselves? Thank you.
Lastly, I was just saying that we do find some evidence of progression and success, so to say, and success is problematic, and maybe we'll come back to that in the Q&A session. In terms of the local level intervention, it's at the local level where we do see some progress actually being made. Lastly, the region is in a very turbulent time, and I think at this time it's really important to study the contemporary history and start to draw conclusions from what we know from previous, in order to make mediation processes more effective. Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibrahim and Dr. Ishak. This has really already been extremely rich, and we are now moving over to a practitioners where I will turn now to Kerma Ekmeki, who is a mediation advisor with UN Women and an associate fellow with the Sam Fares Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs at the American University in Beirut, where she leads the Women, Peace and Security Regional Hub. And prior to this, she was the International Affairs and Relations Advisor to the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri. And she's also the founder of the Diplo Women Initiative and a member of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network. So, Karma, you have had a chance to at least look at and glance at the book. How do you see that it can contribute to a better understanding of mediation processes in the Arab world? And how can this in turn give more of insights in pushing general mediation practices and research forward? Over to you, Karma.
Thank you very much, Charlotta. Thank you for including me in today's discussion. And a big thank you to the 2 editors. I'm almost very happy to learn that you were frustrated back in 2018 because the result is, you know, this, and if I can describe it in 2 words, this holistic and pragmatic compendium that has resulted from that frustration. And I will explain why I call it holistic and pragmatic. So thank you for putting all the effort and gathering all these international and regional scholars to create this wonderful reference. For a practitioner such as myself, where research is my weakest point, I often, you know, rely on whatever resources are available for us in the field of mediation and conflict resolution. And I've always felt my own frustration of how little we have about the region, but also from the region. And so this book sort of addresses that. And it comes to me as like the holy scripture of the Arab world and mediation. I enjoyed mostly knowing, or while going through the book, I mostly enjoyed how thoroughly you have unpacked case studies from the region. And I must say, particularly the case of Palestine, unpacking it so thoroughly comes at a very, very important crossroads here in the region, and a much needed backdrop of lessons learned, challenges, and potential ways forward. We have a tendency in the region to repeat the same mistakes and expect different results. So I hope that this will present itself as a reference tool of, you know, what has not worked. And Dr. Fayhat, you know, mentioned a few points when it comes to that. What I find in my case, of course, the whole book is extremely important, but in my case, what I find more important, and here I talk about the holistic approach, is that the book has put forward the question of inclusivity in its holistic sense, both in mediation and particularly in negotiation, and drawing challenges of women, examples of women inclusion in peace processes and national dialogues, and why this has sort of failed so far, if I can be very honest. And one paragraph caught my eye, and I would like to share it, is obviously the inclusion of women in national dialogue process is crucial for the legitimacy and effectiveness. We know this, the research has shown this. Perhaps the 5 agreements that were reached in the region in the past 4 decades relapsed into conflict because of the lack of inclusive process design. Yet genuine inclusion requires structural shift in the thinking and awareness of the designers of the process. And this is where you have put, as editors, your finger on the problem, the structural, systemic, sort of a cultural wall that we have been hitting over and over again. And how to surpass those obstacles and challenges, I find, is could be an interesting, you know, chance for potentially a wider collaboration with the women and you know, the youth, perhaps, because you speak about inclusivity in the broader sense, for further work, for the further literature that we can produce, perhaps together, looking at how to overcome these structural and systemic issues. What I very much appreciated also in the book is that it looks at mediation with a flexible definition, one that is agile, one that could be adapted, adjusted, and accommodated, and comes from more, like I said, the pragmatic now aspect of why I say it's a pragmatic book. I've often struggled with the Puritan or the purist definition of mediation, and scholars who have, you know, tried to keep the mediation in its purest form, where, you know, it doesn't really necessarily work on the ground. And what this book has offered us is sort of allowing us to say that it's not taboo to speak about, you know, biased mediators, or let's say what we call sometimes a high-powered diplomacy, or sort of brokering. Now this idea of brokering is coming about. Have the Chinese mediated between the Saudis and the Iranians, or have they brokered a deal, right? So we ask these questions: do they fit that definition or not? And this book has definitely done that. What I also sort of would like to highlight is that you have addressed the issue as editors, the issue of the gender gap. Of course, it comes the inclusivity, but also the gender gap specifically. And you have taken it as an issue that is mainstreamed within your book. It's baked into the DNA of the discussion. It has not been treated separately in a silo, which is something that we often see in research papers that are developed, or research literature that is produced purely on that aspect and not baked into the broader sort of discussion or the storytelling of where we are today in mediation in the Arab world. And for me, I really appreciated that. One final point I'd like to make, because I also would like to give my colleague Barbara some time, is that the mediation is an art and a science. And like any art and science, it's constantly in flux. It's constantly sort of adjusting itself to the situation. And conflict is also in flux. The forms of conflict is evolving. If we look at the new patterns or the new sort of conflict patterns that are emerging, and we don't have time to discuss those now, but those offer they impose themselves on us to think of new ways of mediation. But historically, land, air, and sea were the sort of the fields of conflict. Today, you have cyber wars and other sorts of warfare that require us to look differently at how we can solve it, look into our toolbox and see what are the different tools that we can innovate together in order to address these changes in conflict. And I think that, this is something also worthy of future discussion. But again, I am so grateful for this book. A few years ago, two friends wrote a book called Rethinking Peace Mediation, Dr. Catherine Turner and Martin Wachlich. They created this book in 2022. And I remember reading the book and thinking, I wish there was something from our region that could also, bring all these different, it's also a compendium, all these different ideas together. I guess next time I have to wish for world peace, because my wish came true. And so thank you very much for all your efforts. And I look forward to a wider discussion, perhaps, in the future on this. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Karma, for these rich comments adding to the presentations. And with that, I would like to turn to another senior advisor on mediation and peace processes, namely my colleague Barbro Svedberg at the Folke Bernadotte Academy, the Swedish government agency for peace, security and development. Also, Barbro has a long experience from the region, including working on Yemen and on Palestine. So Barbro, over to you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Charlotte, for inviting me, and also foremost to Ibrahim and Isaac for being editors of this book. I think for all of us who works in the region, who works on peace mediation, on dialogue, on facilitation, this is really both a timely contribution, but also brings highlight to a lot of the issues and challenges that we are currently facing. And I think within the last sort of few weeks, a lot of discussions is obviously ongoing also in terms of the escalation in the region, both what we see in Gaza, and I just want to recognize that as we speak at the moment, and efforts that are being done to try to come to some sort of agreement, but also wider in the region where I work in Yemen. We have a stalled UN process, but still a lot of activity going on. And I also appreciate what you say, Isaac, about bringing up the efforts of local mediators. And there we see even installed processes like Yemen, we see a lot of activities and impact of local mediation, which I think is very worth to bring up also when it seems impossible, given the challenges that we are facing. So in terms of the book itself, I think what Ibrahim was reflecting on in terms of the complexity of these conflicts, how do we solve extremely complex conflicts with a lot of internal and external actors as a peace process or mediation support actor. We are trying to understand the complexity and sometimes sort of also getting lost with all the different interests by not only the conflict parties, but by also those that are in support or presumably acting in support of the process. So the tool of analysis, the tool of understanding the complexity is one of the most important tools we have, and those comes through collaboration, not only with local partners, national partners in the context, but also internationally and with researchers. And I think the book, as it presents so many different layers and case studies, gives us additional knowledge actually to bring in that analysis also into the emerging sort of context that we are working. I want to thank you for that. When it comes to process design, and I think I want to also comment, as Karma was saying, new emerging tools seem definitely to be needed in order to grapple with these immense and challenges that we are facing. And there is a new dimensions also to conflicts coming in terms of cyber, AI, things that we perhaps not have unpacked fully when it comes to both understanding the conflict dynamics, but also understanding how mediation practice need to be conducted. And it goes in also to the conduct of mediation. As a mediation support actor, we are in support both to the official channels, but also to the unofficial channels, but also working a lot on identifying actors that are outside perhaps the political or the political table, if there is such a table, but how we work on bringing in not only voices, but the expertise of women, the expertise of youth, the expertise of civil society into these processes. And as you were mentioning, Kama, there's evidence that has shown a more effective peace process when inclusion is being included into the process design of a mediation process. So I think there are some really interesting lessons learned also as to how we as external support actors, how we can come in and contribute to the political processes in ways that perhaps in the past have been more traditional ways of looking at mediation. So also within the Folke Bernadotte Academy and together with Isaac, Ibrahim and others, we have worked quite a lot of looking at new dimensions to effective mediation. What does it mean and how do we develop the tools around mediation, negotiation, dialogue to encompass sort of the complexity. And I wanted to also just touch upon, I think, Isaac, you mentioned that in terms of understanding the history, understanding also past processes, but also past grievances, understanding what is underlying sort of conflict dimensions that is also based on grievances, on trauma, on historical trauma, collective trauma. How do we unpack that to make mediation processes more effective? And I think there is a lot of interesting work that can be done in order to look at these dimensions connected directly to, as you say, process design, to inclusion, and how we bring in sort of the sort of the essence of not only interest, but looking at the historical dimensions from connecting that, of course, to the root causes. So I think there is interesting development in terms of in my world, in my work, when it comes to partnership, looking at new emerging actors within the mediation field, and especially in the MENA region, when it comes to discussions on with the Gulf region's engagement, how will that look in the future? Karma, you mentioned also the role of China, the role of actors that has not been so visible in the mediation space before. I think there's a lot of interesting sort of dynamic there that we could, and I hope we will unpack a bit of those questions also here in the discussion. So I think I'll just stop here and just invite for the discussion to take place. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Barbro. And again, thank you to all our speakers.